thank you very much for having us. We are the STAR program teachers, and we always giggle when somebody introduces us because we are not superstars. We know that you are the experts as far as online courses go, and we are not experts in accessibility, but because of our role working with the STAR program, we do work and think about accessibility all of the time. So STAR stands for Students with Technology Achieving Results, and there are 3 of us in this role. And so I'm here, my name's Leann.HouleLaframboi, and despite what it says on the screen there, I have a big long hyphenated last name, so it looks brutal on the screen, but it's Leann.HouleLaframboi, and I am here with my 2 work partners, Jonathan Jones and Colin Rankin. And we just want to quickly share some tips and tricks and things to consider when you are looking at your online courses.
Awesome. So this is Colin here. Whenever we do a presentation, we try to incorporate this slide. You've probably seen it. It's pretty famous in our neck of the woods. And I believe it comes from the quote, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." And so if we take a look at this picture, we know that that monkey and the bird, they're going to pass that exam. And it's not like, when we're dealing with students with exceptionalities and learning disabilities, it's not like they're not motivated. That elephant, you know, pass that test, he really wants to climb that tree. And the students that we serve in the STAR program, they really want to do well in school. They just have something blocking the way. And so the students that we serve have, you know, learning disabilities a lot of the time, and it means that they have average, above average intelligence. They just have something getting in the way. And specifically, it's usually reading. And so we always like to keep this this slide in mind, that you know, we're serving all the kids, not just the kids that are going to do great on this test.
And so just to give some background information about who we serve, predominantly we go in to schools to serve students who have been identified with a learning disability. We also support their teachers. And our goal essentially is to make sure that with whatever assistive technology a student might have been assigned or is using, that they are, you know, they have as frictionless an experience with that as possible. So our model typically looks like one-to-one withdrawal support. However, we do certainly support students in their classroom environment. We work with teachers in whole group settings. So we might do, you know, one of the tools you hear a lot about today is Read and Write for Google Chrome. And so that's a popular session that we often do with teachers. And really what we want to highlight again, that when we're working with students, or we think about students with a learning disability, we are looking at students generally of average or above average intelligence or cognitive ability that have one, you know, significant, at least one significant and persistent area of need. There's something there that is, you know, providing or is a barrier to their learning and expressing, you know, how much they know. So when we think about this, and we were asked to do this particular presentation, we were thinking ahead to, you know, why would we want to think of AMDEC courses under or through the lens of accessibility? So first and foremost, I think, you know, identified student need, and that we're thinking about this, I think, informally first, you know, that a student might have a particular need or preference for learning or being presented information in a certain way. Again, that need could be formalized through an IPRC process and certainly through an IEP. And then when we're thinking ahead, certainly we're in the midst of this, but when we think about the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which is the AODA, you've probably, you know, heard that short form before. We're looking at making, you know, physical environments, physical buildings accessible. And then we're also thinking about that in terms of web content and content that's available online. And so without getting, you know, too deep into the weeds here with everything that is available online, we will provide you guys with access to this particular slide deck so that you can go back at some point if you want to, you know, read further on what some of these things are. You will certainly hear about the WCAG in conjunction with the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium Web Content. You don't want to try to say that 5 times fast, that's for sure. So a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what this is a set of guidelines that we are in the process of attaining within the province of Ontario. It started in 2014, and there are multiple phases of online accessibility. So any publicly funded web page, which certainly Avon-Maitland District School Board would fall under that umbrella, needs to meet, certain benchmarks and certain guidelines by particular dates. So we're kind of, like I said, midway through, and by 2021 we need to be at sort of what they call a level 2 and their AA guidelines, which is sort of the end goal. One of the things that we thought about, because we really do get into some very particular points here, to sort of go through all of those documents is kind of an arduous process. And so we've tried to distill things a little bit here for you in terms of recommended PDF fonts if you're providing something that could be potentially printed and that may just be accessed on a computer or device screen. You can see between the PDF fonts and the web fonts, which is content that would exist within your courses, that there's a lot of overlap in terms of the font choices here. General sort of guidelines in terms of how to do this would be when in doubt and you're choosing a font, you want to pick a font that is most widely available, and that helps with sort of leveling the playing field depending on what kind of device a student is using to access your content. The more we stick to those fonts that would be preloaded in devices, the more likely your content is to be displayed for the student as it is for you. And really looking at fonts that are simple and without, adornment, without getting overly, decorative. We talk a lot about serif and sans serif fonts. So those are the ones without the ticks and tails, they're sometimes called. And they're generally preferred for web material. They take up less space on the screen. And one of the AODA guidelines that we haven't met yet, but we are going to meet in the coming years, is that online content needs to be accessible in that it can be scaled, I believe up to like 200% greater than it originally displayed on the screen without changing the visual structure or content of the rest of the material. So sticking with these fonts makes that more likely to have success with that. And then certainly there are fonts that are better for students that might be trying to read content online that have dyslexia or other visual impairments. And I've listed a few of the fonts there that you can refer back to.
So now is everyone's favorite part of the day, font trivia. So where have you seen these famous fonts before? So this presentation, by the way, we put in an Arial font because it's the most kind of suggested font for online content. So Arial is maybe one of the more famous ones, but it's the one that's generally used when you're using Google, Twitter, and if you're reading something on the Huffington Post, if you're inclined to do that. Helvetica is more of an Apple font, so that's one that's going to be native if you're using an Apple computer, or if you're using Notes or anything within the iPad jurisdiction there. And then let's see, we have Verdana. And so I know you guys are familiar with that because you're thinking IKEA catalog, and you would be right. So some of the most famous ones there. Interesting about fonts really quickly is that, when you're putting things online for fitting content in, you might think, oh, maybe I want a really big font so everyone can read it, but then you can't get enough information on the page. And then, oh, maybe I want it really small so that you fit a lot of information in. So we looked this one up, and so the suggested font size for online posting and, doing online courses and websites in general is size 12 to 14. So kind of that's the one that I think you'll start typing in if you just open up a Word document right there. Also, and I think that we've all been guilty of this, of choosing a beautiful font before that just looks majestic. And this can actually do more damage than good because it's a lot more confusing if you have a confusing font or a majestic font, and especially when you mix them up like that. And so you want to use the, something more like Arial, Verdana are the easiest fonts to use. And one reason that they're easier to use is they have something called, they use open tail Gs, as opposed to even loop tail G is something that you'll even find in Times New Roman font. And not just for students with learning disabilities or exceptionalities, but that can be difficult for students at younger ages and all ages to understand, how the letters look like. So it's easier to differentiate letters like G and other words using fonts like Arial and Verdana. Next, sorry to make the ugliest slide ever, but it does prove the point of having a low contrast font on a picture there. But you want to use high contrast colors. Really, black and white is going to be a go-to, and then they suggest blue and yellow. But I think that in general, black and white or white on black is a good way to go. Otherwise, it can be really, really difficult to read. And then going along with the colors there, I mean, the winter holidays are some of my favorite times of year, and I've been guilty of this, putting together a document and making font colors and around Christmas time for green and red without thinking, you know what, I actually just made this document really, really hard to read. And so although, we want to make things beautiful, and we are teachers and we are very creative, we want to keep it simple when it comes to online print materials, keep it black and white. I mean, throw in some color every once in a while there, but if you have the rainbow across your screen, then it's going to make things unnecessarily difficult for the majority of your population to read.
So when we're talking about setting these things up with font styles and font sizes and all that, it's not just about what we think looks best. We know that there are things that make a huge difference for some learners. It might be a small thing to us, but can make a huge difference for students who have difficulty seeing the printed page the way we do, students with dyslexia or visual impairments. And also keeping in mind that a lot of times we're using tools like text-to-speech to be able to access that information. So that is where the iPad or Google Read and Write or anything like that is reading the text out loud to that student. So they have the text in front of them, and then they can listen at the same time, which helps them to remember the text, but also helps with students who have difficulty seeing it or decoding. So visual clutter is a huge thing. It's really important to reduce that visual clutter as much as possible, not have too much on the page. And what you need to know as well is that all of those tools for text-to-speech read things really well if it's in a linear way. So meaning it'll read line by line, one after another. So if you have columns or a bunch of things kind of crammed together, or if the text is all over in different places on the page, then those tools will have a hard time reading that, and your student will have a difficult time using the text-to-speech. So we just want to make sure that there isn't too much stuff on the page. And that also keeping in mind that for some people, text in different colors or background colors is really difficult for them to see. There are some forms of dyslexia where it actually interferes with it and they cannot read yellow print, for example, or things that are in different colors. So these aren't just things about making it pretty. It's really important in keeping the text as consistent as possible and keeping that universal design for learning in mind. Many students also have difficulty tracking and keeping their eyes on the page or with attention, so the less clutter there is, the better. So we pulled up a couple of examples here. This is a very extreme one, but you know that the person's intention wasn't to create one of the worst websites ever. They're trying to, probably assuming that with lots of color that it would be attractive or get lots of attention, but again, this makes the text really difficult to see and very difficult to read and also to use tools with. This is an example of text that is fairly clearly laid out. There's a lot of color going on there as well, but with all of those columns, using text-to-speech would be a fairly challenging thing. Not all programs or not all assistive technology would read that with ease. So again, just keeping that in mind to avoid things that look like that. And then this one is altogether just too busy with lots of clutter, lots of small print, and for a lot of people with visual perception problems or even just preferences. And for people like me, I don't even want to tackle that. So these are really extreme examples. We know that, that in your courses, you're not putting together things that look like this, but we're just using these extreme examples just to kind of, drive the point home that if you use those recommended font styles and keep the visual clutter down and the colors down a little bit, it makes it much easier to use the tools and for students to access the information. In looking at your courses, I know that a lot of them are put together, and one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. Those are terms that we as teachers, we use a lot and we talk a lot about. But when you're planning your online courses, it's really important to be planning for all learners as well and to consider their different needs. You're going to have a wide range of needs, abilities, strengths, all of those things with all of your students. So it's really important that that you consider that not all students in particular can access information in a text format that easily. Not everyone's able to do that, even if they are taking an online course. They might be taking that course because it's not offered anywhere else, and that's the format that they have to take it. So you want to make sure, or even that they're choosing to for various reasons, but you want to make sure that that they can access information in ways that, in a variety of ways, not just in text format. So it's our responsibility to make sure that the learning environment accommodates the learners, and it's much easier to do that when you're doing your initial planning than to go back and try to figure out how to accommodate later. So again, in looking at that and considering what we just talked about in that last slide, there are different ways for students to access information. So it's a matter of just making sure that you're providing a variety of ways, that the information doesn't come to them just through text, as was traditionally done many years ago. And I know that a lot of your courses already include a lot of these different media formats, video and podcast, newsletters. You can see the list there. But it's just a matter of keeping in mind that with different learning styles, preferences, and needs, it's great to have a variety. And that's one of the wonders of technology, is that it allows you to add those things to your course. One of the points that came up, I went to a workshop actually where they brought this up, and it made a lot of sense to me. They were saying that students are 64% more likely to watch a video that's embedded if they can see the thumbnail, if they can actually see the video there, as compared to if you just provide a link. So that's just a little tip. If you want your students to open video or to take a look at it, it's much better to add it this way and to provide that thumbnail rather than just a link to the website.
So kind of dovetailing in with what Leann was talking about in terms of the UDL and DI kind of perspectives, I think for students, we want to make sure that, as much as possible, we are giving students choice and giving them options for how they express their learning, or give back, evidence of that understanding. So as much as possible, if you're giving, if you allow for multiple representations of that learning, it could be a traditional text assignment back to you. Could be that you're allowing them to have a written script and something like a video or some kind of a podcast to let you really be able to assess their learning in your courses is great. This next slide talks a little bit about YouTube and closed captioning that exists on YouTube. Now, this is a pretty new discovery for our team. But what we have discovered is that when you post or host content on YouTube, Google actually takes their speech-to-text engine, and actually turns your hosted video into an accessible video, in that it allows you to have closed captioning that accompanies your video. So without you having to load a separate script, which can be time-consuming, especially if you've prepared your script ahead of time and then your video demonstration might differ from your written content. So you don't actually have to present anything ahead of time. You certainly have that option. But any video that you host with YouTube will allow you to use their processing engine without any additional work for you. So this is an excellent tool for students that might have a visual perception issue, or there's a processing speed difficulty. For those that are deaf or hard of hearing, this absolutely allows this video to be read and understood, where they might not have access to the auditory component. The other thing that we should mention in here, and this is certainly one that we come back to, in terms of offering student choice. A student watching a video has the option to turn closed captioning on or off, or the subtitles on or off. They also can manipulate the information and how it's displayed. So they can increase the font size, they can change the font, they can change the background color. They can really tailor that experience to whatever is best for their own learning. So it's not something you really need to spend any time, doing yourself. But if you are incorporating your own, original videos, we would certainly suggest you host or create a channel for your classroom or course through YouTube so that we have access to these tools.
And I'm going to start on the right side of this slide. So this is something taken from the Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, and so their studies show that about 1 in 10 Canadians have a learning disability, which is a pretty big statistic there. And then another interesting about that is about 80% of those people out there that with learning disabilities, what it impacts is their reading. So the disability is a reading disability. And so that's why we've been talking so much about accessible text, and we're talking about, getting stuff read on read and write or accessibility on an iPad. So, why is it important for us to have accessible text? Well, what is accessible text? Accessible text is basically a text that can be highlighted on a computer and read with read and write for Google Chrome, or with, speak selection on the iPad. And it's important because not all students are able to access text and curriculum the same way. So the students that we help with the STAR team are just, as we said earlier, just as smart, if not smarter than their peers, but there's something blocking the way with their learning. Typically that's going to be reading. And so if they can access the curriculum with technology in the classroom, that's what we do, then that's really what we're trying to do. And what's great about what you guys do is that you have all this amazing content available online that students that even would struggle in the traditional classroom, all of a sudden with the right kind of fonts and the right things toggled on, they'll be able to access text and have it read out loud to them. So it's really important. And so just a quick slide showing some things. Will it be accessible using read and write or iOS that can be text be read out loud? So some yes examples include most websites are accessible, like anything off of Google and Wikipedia, for example. Anything in Google Docs is very accessible, so that can be read with read and write on a computer or a Chromebook. It can be read with just accessibility settings, which we have a link to later on how to toggle those on an iPad. Also digital PDFs with online text, they can be read out loud most of the time, and then basically most text available online. So there are some exceptions to this rule. And so if you think about back to the beginning when we had the slide with the picture of the test and the elephant and the fish trying to climb the tree, that's something that might not be accessible because that hasn't been through OCR, optical character recognition. So not all those examples include text within pictures. You couldn't highlight that picture and then have it read out loud. Also PDFs that have been scanned or there's been a picture taken of them, those would not be, you can highlight it on your computer or on the iPad. The general rule is that if you can't highlight it, you can't have it read out loud, and so it's not accessible. And so one trick, which John's going to talk about later, or sorry, I'm going to talk about after this, is that there is a Chrome extension called SnapVerter, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but that's a really great online program that will take texts that are accessible, you put them into a folder in your Google Drive, and then all of a sudden those texts can be highlighted, read out loud. We found a lot of teachers this year have been using information from sites such as Teachers Pay Teachers, and they get PDFs from them. Even though you're paying good money for them, and there's some great resources, they're not always accessible. It's a picture of a text, so you might have to put that through SnapVerter. And then handwritten text and memes are also ones that are difficult to have read with accessibility settings on your iPad or with Read and Write for Google Chrome. So really quickly with SnapVerter, which is another lesson entirely, if you're interested in it, you can click when you have this presentation, the link there. It's the SnapVerter Chrome extension. And overall, I think that people think that it's more complicated than what it actually is, and we're all nodding our heads over here. Yeah. But SnapVerter, basically when you add it as a Chrome extension, it just creates a folder in your Google Drive, like as pictured in the on the slide right there. And within that file, there's a thing that says drop here to convert. So you could take a PDF of something that you want to use online, or maybe it's a paper copy that you have scanned and sent to yourself via email, and it's attached itself as a PDF. You can click and drag and put that in a drop here to convert. Eventually it's going to go to in progress, and finally you're going to find it in the finished folder, and you'll find that once in the finished folder, optical character recognition will have happened, and then so it does a digital overlay on top of the picture of the text, so all of a sudden that text can be highlighted and read out loud in programs like Read and Write for Google Chrome, or just with accessibility settings on your iPad. We are big fans of Read and Write for Google Chrome. If you haven't got the hint already, we really like that program, but it really fills a void. So going back even just a few years ago, it was pretty common to see programs like Kurzweil, Dragon, and WordQ, and we still see them occasionally, and they're really great programs. But one of the problems is that kids didn't have them at home, and then also they were very expensive. Kurzweil was about $3,000, Dragon $300, WordQ $200 if you were to get them at Best Buy. So Read and Write for Google Chrome is available for all students and all staff in the Avalon-Mailing District School Board. It's something we get it for free, and so it does text-to-speech, speech-to-text, and predictive text. If you're interested in pursuing, more information on this, I recommend checking out the following links. For Read and Write to actually work, you want to be using the Google Chrome web browser as opposed to Explorer or Firefox, and then you're going to download the middle link there, and that just takes the Chrome extension. Nice thing about Chrome extensions is that they're very, very small files. They don't take a lot of memory on your computer, and then from there, that's when you could highlight text, select it on a computer, have it read out loud.
So we know that we've been going through this information fairly quickly. We had 30 minutes to do this, and we're still aiming to hit that target. But one of the things that we wanted to do is to leave you with something that you could use very quickly and start using right away today or tomorrow or whenever you're looking at your course again. So we just put together this checklist of some of the simple things that you can start doing that will make a huge difference for your learners and for your students. And then sort of working up to some more complicated ones. If you do find that as you work through this list, you have questions about how to do some of these things or what it means, then please reach out and ask for some help. We can help with this. We have other people within the board that can help you so that, if you're not sure how to create a YouTube channel and to host your videos there, then please reach out and ask for that. But we just thought that this checklist would be something simple. And we've shared it with Lisa and also with Vince. So if they could share that with you, that would be great. And then it's a good place to start.
And so on that note, in terms of reaching out, we wanted to say thank you for your time. We know this comes at the end of a busy day, and that's always a difficult thing. So if you do want to reach out or catch us with a question, we are found at those. We were found at those email addresses in the online world.